Well, I hope I can live up to the introduction. First, I want to say it's a real privilege to give a talk on my book at the Westport Library, because the Westport Library has been a real innovator in terms of bringing tinkering and the maker culture into the library setting. So it was just sort of a coincidence that brought us together, but it's worked out really great, and thanks to Bill Derry for helping make this all happen. As he mentioned in his introduction, my book is a lot of, it's partially about what's going on in tinkering right now in the contemporary world, but it also touches on history. But more specifically, it talks about what the ideas behind being a tinkerer are, and what is the mindset of a tinkerer. So we should start by talking about, well, what is a tinkerer, as I define it in the book, and how does a tinkerer differ from, say, an inventor or a hacker or a lot of the other types of innovators that we know in American society. Now, typically the term had negative connotations. You'd think of sort of the old crackpot puttering around in the basement, not really knowing what they were making, but just sort of having fun with old spare parts. But in fact, that's kind of the heart of what, in my mind, tinkering is about, because a true tinkerer is a dilettante, but in a good way. We tend to think of tinkerers as trained engineers or specialists in their fields, but historically in this country, tinkerers were really not specialists. They were generalists. I mean, certainly engineers can be tinkerers, but typically tinkering is what they're doing in their spare time when they're not at work. So, and in fact, I've met a lot of those people, talking to other groups about this book. Tinkering is looking at the things around us and thinking about new things we can make from existing things. It's about keeping one's eyes and ears open to the possibilities. Tinkerers sometimes try to solve problems, but oftentimes they end up solving completely different problems. But that's okay, because it's really about pursuing their personal passion initially. It may turn into some huge corporation one day, but that's typically not how they first got into it. We talk about education these days a lot, and whether we're teaching our kids the right things, and a lot of people wonder how can we get some of that tinkering spirit back into the schools. But I would argue that it's not about teaching kids how to tinker. I think most kids know how to tinker. If you give them some things to play around with, they'll typically play around with them and try to figure out how they work and see what they can make out of them. I think that we've become a test-taking culture in a lot of ways, and we sometimes forget that. And teachers, of course, I understand, teach the test because they're under pressure to show higher scores on, for their districts. But I don't think that we really need to teach kids how to tinker. We just need to make sure we don't squash that tinkering spirit too early. So my book begins sort of with my own sort of tinkering experience, if you will. And that's when I sat on my BlackBerry. I was getting into the car, and I realized pretty quickly I had damaged the screen. I also realized that the phone was still working, but I couldn't read anything on the screen. So I took it to the local phone store, naively thinking either they could fix it or I would turn it in for another one relatively cheaply. And the salesperson told me, I wish I could fix it. I used to do that. It was my favorite part of the job, but they don't let us do that anymore, actually. But he could sell me a new one. And I said, well, great. And he said, well, it's $450. And I said, well, not so great. So I went home, and I don't know why, out of frustration, did a Google search and found a group of, whoops, I'm just trying to, I've got something over here, videos on YouTube that, and I think, well, maybe I can't get this one to work. Sorry, we got a little technical difficulty here. It's right there.
You have to go off the side of the screen and then come in there.
In any case, I'll explain it to you. It was a video on YouTube that literally told me how to take apart my BlackBerry, remove the screen, and put in a new screen. So I went online and got a special set of screwdrivers for a couple dollars and ordered a new screen for about $20 and followed the video to the letter. To my surprise, when I opened it up, there were about 5 pieces. You know, it's just a screen, a circuit board, and a keyboard, and took the old one out, plugged the new one in, put it all back together, and it worked like new. So that was my little sort of tinkering realization that, you know, we live in a culture now where we're sort of intimidated by these high-tech devices that we have, and feel like we're not supposed to open them. I mean, companies tell us you're not supposed to open them because you'll void the warranty. But, you know, frankly, I figured, well, if I was going to throw the thing out anyway, I might as well give it a shot. And turned out it wasn't very difficult. And in fact, of course, humans made these things in the first place. So theoretically, it shouldn't be that difficult to at least figure out how to replace the screen. You know, I think the idea for this book sort of came out of the time after the big economic crisis of 2008, 2009. There were a lot of white-collar workers sort of losing their jobs and worrying about what they actually did, realizing that we had become a huge service economy. But, you know, the United States used to be a country that could make things. And did we make anything anymore? I learned in my research, in fact, that the United States still is a huge manufacturer. Most of the things that we make are very high-end, you know, electronics items. The difference is, of course, is these days we just don't need as many people to make all of those things. But we certainly are still a manufacturing hub, and in fact, there's been a trend even since I started working on the book of a lot of big companies like Google and Apple trying to manufacture some of their devices on American shores again. So, so that turned out to be a little bit of a misnomer. I tried to sort of boil down what tinkering meant in terms of putting the book together, but also just to sort of think about whether we as a country had lost this this tinkering spirit, or whether it whoops, there we go. Or whether it was something that just needed to be sort of refreshed or reawakened. As I mentioned before, tinkering is not so much a specific set of technical skills. There tends to be a pretty instrumental view of knowledge, but you just pick up enough knowledge about electronics and textiles and metals, programming or paper folding to figure out how to do what you want to do, and then you know, you try to come up with something new. Certainly, skills are important, but they're means to an end. You know, mastery isn't the point, I guess, with tinkering. The point is sort of coming up with something new. Before I sort of delve back into history a little bit to talk about tinkering in this country, I just wanted to point out a few of the things that are going on in the culture right now that show that there is sort of a renaissance going on in tinkering. I don't know if anybody, most people here have been to a maker fair. I know the Westport, Mark Mathias has arranged some mini maker fairs for the Westport Library. They're really, really wonderful festivals of all sorts of tinkering and electronics and art and music. Another thing going on these days are these so-called hacker spaces or tinkering workspaces, where you can essentially go in and there's all sorts of high-tech equipment you can play around with. This sort of tries to address the problem that some people have mentioned, which is that in the old days when tinkering wasn't so, you know, high-tech, most people had a workshop in their basement and they would have all the tools they needed to pretty much do anything. And today, you know, a lot of people can't afford sort of more of the high-tech things that might be needed to do different kinds of tinkering, but but you can certainly go and visit one of these